We always say energy too cheap to meter, right? And that's the North Star.
Pessimists sound smart, but optimists make money.
Utopia is something that we constantly must be building towards. The moment we stop pushing the boulder up the hill, it's going to roll back and squash us.
Hard to overstate how important this technology was. It's the reason most of us are alive today, the reason that our planet can support 8 billion human beings.
I saw Sundar Pichai saying that Sergey Brin in the office now, and he's probably been there for a while, and he's been coding himself.
All right, so welcome to episode 4 of the Frontiers podcast. I am Steve, based in New York, working in finance, focused on healthcare and incentives. I'm joined by my co-host, John.
Hey everyone, John, based in London, working in technology, focusing on AI.
And he's finally got the thinking hat, which I really like. So salute you for supporting Anthropic, who, as I've mentioned on past episodes, I think has the mandate of heaven.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that a lot of these companies are doing these small pop-up stores. Anthropic did one in London a couple of weeks back, and I was really lucky to get there and get one of these hats. But then Cursor had one earlier on this week.
Yeah, but that's invite only though, right? Didn't you have to DM them to get there, or you could just show up?
I think they had an event page on Luma where they requested sign-ups. I'm pretty sure they probably accepted most people that signed up. It seemed to be just a drop-in, come and work with us from like 9 to 5. I think there might have been some like private events happening at the same time I think that there was like open to the general public. Yeah, just generally just trying to build that furor, that energy. I thought it was a great idea. Get the community together in a single spot. And it's rare to have that in London. Everything feels so dispersed sometimes when it comes
Yeah.
to technology. It's not, say, the valley where everyone is there for the same reason. So, yeah, awesome vibes. Yeah, really happy that to see that. I hope more companies might take inspiration from that and do the same.
That's awesome. So you met some cool people there, some smart people, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah, I really enjoy the vibes and energy.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Cool. And yeah, so congrats again on the new family member. I think it's fantastic. Excellent news. Super, super happy for you.
Thank you. Learning how to be a parent and everything that comes with that.
Cool. This week, we're going to be talking about Jason Crawford's chapter 5, parts 1 and 2, which is why betting on human ingenuity means working like hell, why optimism is good, but it requires a lot of rolling up our sleeves and doing the work. So it's a really interesting chapter for this week. Before we get to that, I do want to dive in on current events. Do you want to give the overview of yours?
Sure. I think the main things that I picked up on recently are one, obviously the launch of GPT 5.2. The latest model from OpenAI is it's done really well on certain benchmarks, especially one that I was looking into, I was less familiar with, but called GTP Val, which is, I think, created by OpenAI as well. And it's an attempt to capture real economically valuable work. So they've pulled together this data set, which is various tasks from like a range of occupations across 9 different sectors, and they measure the model's performance on those sort of tasks. And the outputs often could be text, but they could also be like visuals, illustrations, that kind of thing. So it's like a wide range of different activity. And there was a huge bump up like between GPT-5 and GPT 5.2. I think GPT-5 scored like 38% or so, and GPT-5 hit like 70%, which was quite a big deal. But I think the biggest sort of shock for me was like the progress that we're making on Arc AGI, which is this arena data set of tasks that have been created by Francois Chollet, who's one of the creators of Keras, which is a really popular framework for building like machine learning and AI models. And it was intended to be a data set, a benchmark that would really throw off like large language models. The design of it is essentially like some games or logical puzzles. Here are two like images of a 2D puzzle, and this is the pattern that connects them. And here's another set of examples. Can you apply that same pattern and solve the problem? And the models don't really have that much data to work with, so they're working in this really like low data environment, which is quite difficult for the models that we currently build. We often throw a lot of data at them and hope they will generalize and learn a pattern. But we're specifically like playing in this arena where they don't have much information, so they have to be quite efficient in how they're learning. And when it first came out, this ARC AGI benchmark, most people, including myself, thought, oh, this is something that's going to take these models a long time to be very good at. And we're going to have to invent some new mechanisms, some new ideas to really like see tremendous progress. And already we're seeing a lot of these large language models with some developments from where they were like a couple of years ago, doing really well. Some of the like methods that they're adopting are like generating like Python programs on the fly and iterating on them in order to figure out solutions to these problems, like in an evolutionary way. So yeah, with GPT 5.2, like when it came out, I think something that really took the AI community by storm was that the performance on ArcAGI 1, which is like the first version of this dataset, was really high into the 70 to 80% range. And the efficiency of the model, I think they had a 400x efficiency gain, by which I mean like how much money it costs for these large language models to solve a particular solution.
Sure.
Uh,
So it's the inference cost savings, basically. They're 400 times more efficient on inference.
which is tremendous. And at the moment we've got like an Arc AGI 2 version 2, and they're currently working on a version 3, and we're seeing those steady progress on like version 2 as well. I think the current best scores are around like 25%. Yeah, which is yeah, just staggering. I think like the progress that we're making on that data set. So those are the things that like really caught my attention earlier on this week.
And how does that compare? It's interesting. How does it compare with Gemini? Because I remember, what was it, 2 weeks ago now, the latest Gemini was unveiled and it just blew the other foundation models out of the water on the benchmarks.
Yeah, actually, I think I was trying to look for this because if you go on the Arc AGI website, they've got like a blog and they detail like progress on all these models, and they captured like the open AI, like GPT 5.2 scores. I don't think they quite captured the Gemini 3 performance, which was up there as well, from what I understand. So I'm waiting to see if there's going to be an update from them. But yeah, I also heard Gemini 3 is like outstanding, and kudos to Google. I think some Chai saying that Sergey Brin is in the office now, and he's probably been there for a while, and he's been coding himself. And people are saying that he's been one of the most instrumental figures at this moment in time, like driving progress at Google, and they seem to be doing like really well
They
when
have
it
had
comes.
an incredible comeback. I mean, you've seen that just play out in real time over the past year. If you would have told me that a few years ago, I would not have believed that Google would be still just out in front in such the way that they are now. It's really remarkable.
I do wonder, I need to look into this, but in what kind of tasks people are like using Gemini versus some of the other models. So I find like for coding, I'm often using Claude. I don't really use ChatGPT very much at all these days,
Mm.
though it's like positioned as a good personal assistant. I tend to use Claude as well for some reason, but I hear as a personal assistant, ChatGPT might be better. Gemini, the only place I'm really using Gemini, I'm like leveraging its multimodal abilities. So like when I'm writing a sort of a program or an application where I'm passing like a PDF or something like that, I'll throw the PDF at Gemini, and it
Mm.
will do a job like extracting a lot of the information from there. But I'm curious like where else people are finding value in a sort of Gemini versus some of the other major providers.
Yeah. It's interesting. It does seem like we're in the early innings of what starts to be specialization. So Gemini, obviously, with Nano Banana and like image generation, image editing, and then you're seeing obviously ChatGPT is way out in front in terms of consumer AI, consumer LLM. They have
Mm,
way more users than anyone else, and it seems to be the biggest mind share, especially among non-technical people, right? So if I talk to members of my family, nobody knows what Claude is, but they're very familiar with ChatGPT. And I think that's also the case even in finance when I talk to other people. I think some folks that I talk to at work or like generally just in finance will say, "Oh, I'm familiar with Grok or whatever." But even among finance people, they know Grok, they know ChatGPT, they might know Gemini, they don't know
mm,
Claude. Claude, every
right.
time I mention I'm working with Claude, they're like, "What? Who's
Yeah.
Claude?"
That's brilliant. You're right. In terms of brand appeal, brand awareness, I think, yeah, OpenAI is just really lean into that first mover advantage, captured a lot of the popular like consumer imagination. I do wonder how it is amongst enterprises though, and how much awareness, yeah, how that sort of brand awareness changes. I imagine most big companies are either using both or leaning. I do actually wonder if they're leaning more heavily towards Claude and Anthropic. I need to read up on this, but
I
yeah.
think it's highly vertical specific. I will say anecdotally, folks who I've talked to at banks are using OpenAI a lot. I
Mm,
will say there's a lot of banks across the street now using OpenAI, for
mm,
sure, for sure.
mm. What do some of these banks use it for? Do you know? Have you got wind of? Yeah.
So I think because it is so heavily regulated and
Mm,
because just in the last, call it couple of quarters, banks have really made investments in earnest to have it on the other side of their firewalls. So they'll
mm,
run inference locally within their like
yeah.
air gapped or whatever protected firewall.
Mm,
And the key reason for that is they want to avoid obviously people using it for confidential information. Confidentiality is like of primary concern for all these banks, right? So for them, it's if we can get the OpenAI model set up so the inference is running locally or on premises, or I don't know how they're doing it, but in a cloud that's controlled by the bank, then
mm,
you can use it for a lot. Within financial services, you're using it for everything from summarize this equity research report for me, or you could use it for the big one. I think that's gotten a lot of attention that I haven't seen take off yet is financial modeling. I think a lot of folks think that oh, financial modeling is one of those things that's super grimy and kind of labor intensive and will eventually be the domain of AI for us to just be like the editor there. But I think that's
mm,
probably a little ways away just because when the AIs are building these models, they're doing it in their way. It's the same thing that when we do artificial flight, we don't have planes flapping their wings like we do with birds flying. So it's the same thing when they go to build like a leverage buyout model. The way they're doing the formulas on discounting is pretty strange. And mathematically, maybe it's sound, but it's harder for people to get conviction that it's correct. And so you, as an investment banking junior, are now like going through and checking the model to try to make sure the math is right. And at 2 in the morning, it's probably not going to be helpful if it's just using this like super complex formula that's the size of your thumb. So yeah, I think that's probably actually one of the last places that'll get automated. What's happening now is like basic stuff, right? All of the admin work that investment banking juniors have to do, like putting together summaries of earnings calls, going through earnings call transcripts and mining for the sentiment analysis, going through commentary on recent M&A transactions and trying to find like those little tidbits, like those nice punchy quotes that like epitomize the strategic rationale of a deal. Like a lot of that qualitative language in, language out stuff, the LLMs are pretty adept at and very good at going through equity research. I think one of the fun things to do is if you have a through the cycle chart, which would show like the multiples, the valuation multiples of different companies or different indices. So, like in specific subverticals over time, you could see, oh, there's a dip. So, for example, if you said multiples are starting to compress, and I'm just making this up, but you could say, oh, multiples are starting to compress with such and such subsector in the industrial space. Why is that happening? Then you could take like this big equity research report within that particular subvertical of industrials and upload it to the AI. And so you feed the large language model the chart and the data, which shows all of the multiples vacillating, but showing this like up and down trend. And then you feed it the qualitative information, which is coming from equity research. And then you say, synthesize for me in very few words, like two
mm,
succinct, punchy bullets. Why
mm,
had it has it gone up and then back down? And it will
mm.
give you the right answers to the test. And you oftentimes need that for a voiceover or you need that for a page because everyone's going to ask you that. Why does it go up and then back down? You could spend a lot of time running the legwork on that, or you could just rely on the LLM to give you something nice. So I think like that use case is really helpful.
I wonder if there's quite a lot of analogies in the way financial engineers or modelers are able to use these models in the same way engineers are using these models. Like, it, to me, I'm asking myself, like, is the expectation that someone can just ask ChatGPT, Claude for a financial model of a particular company and that would do all the work to figure out all the state its underlying assumptions, gather all the research, pull that all together, and navigate, I guess, the spreadsheet. Spreadsheets like the format in which is most ubiquitously used. And there's probably like an issue there in how well it can navigate spreadsheets. But in the world of like software engineering, like the IDE is where we live in, like the editor and everything is text, so it's a little bit simpler to navigate. But I think where people struggle is where they try to vibe code like an entire application or piece of code, depend entirely on the AI models to build everything from like scratch and without specifying like instructions clearly. And I think in those cases, most of the time, people are let down. But where people are getting a lot of value is where they're able to architect the software and they're able to design and engineer it, but then they're delegating the tasks to the language models, to the AI, and it's able to follow instruction very well and put together like code that works and meets requirements. And I wonder if it's the same in like your world, is if you had someone like you paired with these AI models, you can architect the financial model, but and then you can leverage AI to go and grab all the pieces of information that you need to bring it back and synthesize it and stitch it together in the way that you like specify.
Can it really do that though? Because what I've seen, just me, and I've spent probably a couple hundred hours trying to vibe code various things with these models. And my experience, it's okay, you can go on Replit or you can go with Claude and ask it to vibe code you something which is pretty simple in nature, and it will
Mm,
do a pretty impressive first pass. But the
mm,
second iteration of that, as soon as you bring up the fact that there's some kind of bug, it will go and try to fix the bug, and then it will lose some functionality from the beginning. And
yeah.
so very quickly you end up in this weird game of whack-a-mole. And if you go down that rabbit hole, tens, scores of hours trying to fix this, you
Mm,
realize that it would actually have just been faster if you have done it yourself from the beginning, or if, like you said, you just took specific files. So, like for this 300 line cluster of code, please fix
mm,
this part. For you know
mm,
what I mean? But like you really have to piecemeal it because
mm,
as soon as the application becomes complex, and it's not
mm,
even that much complexity, right? Any application where you have to like have login credentials. I want
mm,
users to be able to create profiles, log in, log out, forgot my password. Super
mm,
simple stuff, right? This is like every basic application has those functions. It cannot do that itself, right? It needs you to help set up the back end. Here's the SQL. It talks to this part. This is what the
mm,
front end looks like. This is what the email looks like. But the context window is not yet large enough, and I think the AI is not yet smart enough to set this up. Even if you told it everything in excruciating detail how you want the application to look like, it can't do that. And I think the same thing happens in financial services. If you ask it to build you, you can give it an information memorandum for sure for a company. And the information memorandum, for those of you who don't know, is basically just an 80 to 100 page document which has all of the key information about the business, the headquarters, etc. Of course, the most important part that everyone flips to immediately is the financials in the back. So you'll go to like page 60 and it will have all the historical financials, but then it has the business plan, which is like on a go forward basis. What's the company going to do in revenue, EBITDA, gross margin for the next 5, 10 years, whatever, right? And so you can feed it that. It's going to have all the numbers and it can build a model. First pass will probably be pretty good. But the second pass, the minute you ask it, oh, what assumption are you making on forecasting your depreciation and amortization? Suddenly it becomes weird. And then it's what's going on? This doesn't make any sense. It would have been faster for me to just do it myself. So,
mm.
and you can tell there's a bit of frustration in my voice because I've had both of these experiences, both on the software building side of things and on the model building side of things. It's just not there yet. I wish it was.
I think there is difficulty in getting it to work bit by bit on like iteratively like improving piece of a system. I'm sure there's people that can wrangle these tools in order to do that pretty well, especially if you're able to keep the entire system and relationships in your mind and you're able to focus its attention very specifically on one point. I was at like a recent meetup in the UK, an AI engineering meetup, and someone spoke about this point precisely. It was like there comes a time where what you really want when you reach that point where the model is like just breaking down and things are not really slotting together in the way that you hope to get it to collect all of the knowledge and all the requirements that you specified so far, put it in a new file, and get it to rewrite the whole thing from scratch. And so just discard everything and get it to go again so it's more coherent. And he's found like by doing that, he's able to make the person that's giving the presentation make a lot more progress and
Rewrite the
using
whole application from scratch or
yeah, or whatever bit that he was particularly working on, not just yeah, to accumulate knowledge and requirements over time and don't try to at some point in time get the model to keep iterating and correcting and updating what it's already working on, get it to
Mhm.
delete everything and go again. And usually that worked well for him. Yeah, so I think there's still a lot of knowledge and expertise to be accumulated and gained from in how to use these models effectively in order to increase your productivity. But yeah, hopefully it'll become easier in the future and you will be able to, like, first time round, it will be able to knock it out of the park. And then those iterations, those painful iterations you spoke about, will hopefully be coherent and yeah, won't lead to some of the frustrations that you faced in due time.
It's funny because like even the foremost experts in the AI space
Mm,
realize the limitations of these tools, and this exact problem
mm,
repeats itself ad nauseum across the valley, across people who code, across people who are trying to use these models to get anything done. It almost makes me wonder, and this is the question I had for you, like these benchmarks, if if we're still facing the same fundamental problem that new bugs are appearing every time we ask for one discrete problem to be solved, or as soon as you patch one bug, another bug appears, I don't know. Are we losing the forest for the trees here? Why are we optimizing? Why are we overfitting for these benchmarks and these abstract puzzles when we could just try to make the language model actually address this like very discrete, very like solvable problem?
I think, yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, you're basically asking, are these benchmarks really reflecting the kind of work that we want to be deploying these models to help us with? And in some cases, they do, but they might be in a window of time which is very short so that you can evaluate these things. But where we want is to have these models as like companions that would stay with us and work with us over an extended period of time and to maintain that context over days or hours, days, whatever it is. And it's impossible to test that efficiently, to have a benchmark to test that
That's a lot
efficiently.
of inference what you're suggesting. That's a
Right,
huge
exactly.
window.
But that's how we want to use them. And when we do try to use them for those particular use cases, we run into these like memory limitations or this scaffolding limitation that prevents the model from functioning
Just
well.
as I hear you describe this, I'm picturing like so much concrete being poured, like a data center
Yeah,
the size of
right.
the Empire State
Yeah,
Building, just all of the hamsters running so that you
yeah,
can have all the context tokens you want.
yeah. I guess they tried to simulate that by like creating data points in these data sets that are might be snapshots of the work at different moments in time. But it's a hard problem. Like how designing an evaluation set that really mirrors real world usage. And we're so creative as people. Like whatever someone designs, is always going to be use cases that crop up which just don't fit those specific things that Ted's
That's
looking
fine.
for.
I'm sure there's edge cases, right? I'm sure on the
Yeah.
tail, there's always going to be, oh, it does this one thing. But every single dev, you know this, every single person who codes using these tools has the same problem. I patch a bug, new bug shows up. I'm not
Yeah.
even a technical person and I'm having this problem. I can't imagine someone who does this for a living is running into this every single day.
I think it's a skill. I do think it's a skill. And I mean, that's just general software development. Anyway, as a human, you're often, you're fixing things and new things prop up. Yeah, like
Mm.
you never have like your perfect state of code. There's always things that crop up that like keeps us busy. But I'm curious. I find it interesting that whenever I hear presentations and t talks from people from Anthropic, a lot of the times they say that for the most part, AI has replaced or is writing most of their code. Now, that could be marketing. I don't know. It might be a bit of it. But it's interesting. If that were true, that'd be very fascinating. And was speaking to some of my software engineer friends over the weekend, and I was asking them, like, how much are you relying on these coding tools? And one person in particular said, not very much at all. He's still writing like 70 to 80% of his code by hand. I just find that contrast really interesting, and I wonder is Anthropic, other people from Anthropic distorting reality, and is it more like is the reality more of what you're describing? Like for the most part, these things are completely useless apart from in very specific instances, or is it a skill issue? Does this person really struggle maybe to articulate or communicate instructions to in a way in which, let's say, a junior developer, which is what most people are describing these models to be as, like could comprehend precisely and implement precisely and execute well. And
Yeah.
I find that really interesting. I wish I could have a comparison of like, someone who claims to be an expert at using these language models versus someone like that who's an excellent software engineer, but struggling to get the most out of these models. So,
I think it's okay. There's 2 points, right? So, first off, the more domain expertise you have, and the more times you've done a particular task by hand, the more you have this foresight. You know
mm,
what tends to happen when, you know what bad things tend to go wrong when you try to do this task by hand. So now with that foresight, you're able to give a prompt that sort of anticipates those problems. These are the challenges I already face doing it by hand. I know you, as the machine, are going to face them as well. So I
mm,
work that into my prompt. And so I make a prompt that's very
mm,
nuanced, very clever because I anticipate that.
yeah,
Whereas a junior person who's never done the task by hand many times is also not going to anticipate it when writing that in finance all the time, right? Like these new grads that are just joining, like even though the AI is the one doing the work, and you will tell them like, "Hey, yeah, use the AI to do X, Y, Z," and they'll do it, but the output is far subpar from if I had done it, just because we're giving different prompts, because
yeah,
I have a much more high fidelity understanding of what's actually happening versus
mm,
them, which is maybe it's more akin to magic, right? It's like when I'm doing software, I'm out of my element. I'm not a technical person. So for me, it's
yeah,
just like magic. I'm like, hey, make this be
yeah,
like this. And then it does it. I'm like, oh, okay, but that's not quite what I want. Please do this. And probably takes me like 10 times longer than someone who's an experienced dev who
mm,
just gets on there and just knows exactly the ins and outs and the
yeah,
faults that you're going to run into in setting up something simple. And so for
yeah.
them, maybe prompt engineering works.
Yeah, certainly. I can see the parallels. But hey, we talked all about this and then what I find interesting, what I found interesting. What's been on your mind?
But yeah, okay, so that's interesting to know. I think my topic for this week is a little bit more on the hard tech side of things. Huge win for Charles de Gaulle this week, and I'm not talking about the airport. That's right, the French. Can you believe it? The French. Well done. I know I make a lot of jokes, but France is really crushing it. On December 8th, electricity prices in France temporarily dropped to zero. Consumers got power for free for several hours, and this wasn't some kind of like grid failure. This is abundance. This is the beginning of abundance, and this is what happens when you have 85% nuclear capacity running strong combined with high winds from renewables and an unseasonably warm weather, reducing the demand. Meanwhile, Europe is seeing this more and more, growing renewable generation during periods of low demand, increasingly pushing electricity prices to zero and sometimes even into negative territory, which I guess means you get paid to use electricity. And so, what does this mean? Like the results of decisions made 50 years ago after the oil crisis in the early 70s, France faced a choice, right? Do you become complacent and just say, oh, markets will figure it out? Do you become defeatist, like we're a small country without oil, we're screwed? Or do you become solutionist? And so this will touch on our topics for today with Crawford. But the French are literally sitting there like, we need energy independence. Nuclear is the answer. Let's build 56 nuclear reactors in 15 years. And they chose
Yeah.
option three. That's the Mesmer plan. They built it out in one generation. And it takes a mixture of different institutional things to make this happen, right? There's the state will, there's CDG himself, Messner, there's this national pride, strategic vision, there's the engineering capacity, right? France has some of the best engineers in the world, some of the smartest mathematicians coming from Polytechnique and others. But you have these companies, EDF, Areva, so the technical competence and institutional framework is there. You have the long-term capital, right? So government investors, not just like this quarterly earnings pressure, but then you also have the international scientific knowledge, right? The fact that we knew global nuclear physics, right? So it wasn't just capitalism, it's civilizational capacity, the ability to marshal diverse resources, institutions, and motivations towards solving hard problems. But it's incredible. The memes have been great. Hats off to the French for doing this. If you look at a map of Europe now and who's generating the most renewable energy and where that energy is flowing, it's actually
Hmm.
hilarious. Yeah, it's really pretty remarkable.
Wow. That's incredible. That's fascinating. So for an instance in time, a couple of hours, energy was free. And is this something that is repeatable? It was turned by a confluence of things, right? The supply of energy at some point in time just became so great because of all of the different sources that were combining, and that was able to drop the electricity prices are dynamic, right? Informed by supply and demand. And at this moment in time, because the supply was so high, it basically dropped to zero.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
thing. Because with renewables, you always have the intermittency problem, right? The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And then when you need it, when you have the energy, you might not need to use it, right? Like at night. And when, in this case, we have a very unseasonably warm winter. So, like, you have all this excess that the grid is giving off and no one's there to absorb it. So, supply and demand curves cross below the equilibrium. And now the power company's paying you to take the energy. But it
That's
does make you wonder this happened for like a few hours. What if this could happen for a few years,
oh,
for a few
yeah.
decades, right? When you talk about the economics of abundance, things get pretty weird because the entire field of economics is that, as we know it, is how to deal with the problem of scarcity. In my
Mm,
view, energy is upstream to everything. So if you make energy cheap and abundant and you make the cost approach zero, then suddenly everything which requires energy to produce that, the cost of producing that thing then approaches zero as well.
yeah. That's incredible. What an incredible vision, if that's possible. We always say energy too cheap to meter, right? And that's the North Star. And was a moment in time where that was true. And I think you're right. Like energy is like one of these fundamental pillars which we need to get move it towards that point. I think the other one is intelligence. If we have intelligence as a species that is available on demand cheaply and the energy to execute on like our ideas, wow, like hopefully we could solve like a tremendous amount of problems and push humanity like forward in wonderful ways. Yeah, that's really inspiring stuff. I didn't see that.
Crazy. The Germans are making screeching noises right now. They're upset. I saw someone on Twitter
What are
wrote,
they,
what's that? Sorry.
what are they upset about?
Oh
They've been
man,
primed
like
by the
Yeah, compared Germany's, they shut down their nuclear plants, went all in on renewables without the base load. I don't know if you've ever been to Germany. It's not the most sunny place. And now they're like burning lignite coal and importing power from France's nuclear plants. So it's almost poetic, the irony there. Someone released like this map of nuclear plants in Europe in 2050, and it's basically just Germany with like nuclear plants along the entire perimeter.
Brilliant. We've got to show that. Oh man, brilliant. Where did you get that from, by the way? What are you reading?
Oh, I just saw it on Twitter. People were making all kinds of jokes about it, and there was memes about Charles de Gaulle and
Yeah.
EDF, and no, I think it's great.
Mm,
For all its faults, I gotta say France is doing some things right. So for all the
mm.
French engineers and mathematicians and smart folks who made this possible, and for the institutional will of Charles de Gaulle to have the foresight about that so many years ago, like 50 years ago now, it's fucking awesome.
Yeah, it is incredible. I do wonder like what kind of backlash he might have faced at that time, comparing it to the how the stance on nuclear has changed over the years, especially in Japan, where they were, I guess, at some point in time pro nuclear, and then obviously you had the Fukushima incident, which really changed public perception. I don't know where it is now, but I'm curious like how much he had to overcome as an individual to initiate this kind of push towards nuclear.
It's hard because the pendulum always swings too far the other way. In
Mm,
the US, we had 3 Mile Island, and it was the same problem. You have the institutional framework ready to go, ready to lay out the plans to up US electricity production capacity. And then there's all these emotional arguments that, based on one disaster or one mishap, suddenly blow things out of proportion. And then you have just no political will to make this stuff happen. And I think you saw it in Germany. We're seeing it in Japan. And Fukushima's a funny example because they're actually moving soil away from that site, which is has trace amounts of radioactivity, but is actually probably lower than like the natural radiation you would get if you were in like Colorado or somewhere in the US Western Rockies. So it's a bit strange. Nuclear is hard for people to wrap their heads around because the dose makes the poison. So it's always very low doses of radiation are all around us. You get it when you're on a plane. You get it when you're flying. You had it when you flew from London to New York, right? Radiation's everywhere. We get it when we get CT scans. But I think the emotional kind of reaction to it is so strong, it's really hard to convince people otherwise.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but anyway, so look, I think that's a good segue
Uh,
to Crawford's solutionist framework. So we're going to talk today about Sir William Crookes and Ehrlich and Borlaug, and I love the characters in the story, so we'll kick things off. So yeah, basically, Crawford's deep dive on solutionism, the wheat problem. So starting with the summary, and do you want to go ahead and give us the overview?
Yeah. Okay. So he started off chapter five detailing a particular moment in time. I think it was late 1800s. The world is experiencing issues with food and famine. And out comes this individual, Sir William Crookes, in the UK, takes the podium and tells the world, we're facing this problem, this shortage of food, which I anticipate will really hit us hard in several decades if we do nothing about it. And he's quite alarmist. And a lot of people at the time were very dismissive, either out of from a point of optimism or pessimism. You had a lot of people coming out and saying the world has always faced its problem and this is just another problem and it will solve itself. A solution will present itself. We don't need to do anything as extreme as what you are presenting. Because I think he had not only specified the problem, but also some ideas on how we might go about solving it. But then, of course, you had the pessimists on the other side who were saying this is too extreme. We shouldn't be doing interfering in this kind of way. You've gone too far. This is not really as big as a problem as you may suggest. Crookes, who's whilst sounding alarmist and pessimistic, was really encouraging forward action. He recognized this problem and that humanity would be in dire straits, but was really encouraging the world and the thinkers at the time to invent a new solution that would keep us on this path of growth. And in the end, we had solutions available that came in the form of like machines and also fertilizer. You had the Haber-Bosch process that was invented that helped us stay off some of the issues that he was predicting. And he offers Crookes as a person that is quite contrasting to the other character in the story, Paul Ehrlich, who several decades later was also talking about a similar issue in the sense of there's a overpopulation that was going to be starving the world of resources and individuals, and instead of Taking kind of Crookes's position where like recognizing the problem, wanting to do something positive about it, Ehrlich was very pessimistic and much more skewed towards degrowth, as in we should stop making progress where we are. We're only going to exacerbate the problem. Instead, we should curtail all innovation and accept it and put downward pressure on society and to cut the privileges that we have. For example, to put like population control in place and things along those lines. And so he offers those two characters like as a comparison of how we might react as a species to some of the problems that we face. And he's encouraging us really to push towards what he calls solutionism, which is realistic, accepting of the problem at hand, but being quite positive and taking action to really invent and progress society and regress. So that was my summary. I missed a character out there like Baller, but maybe you can introduce him like when you share your views. But that was the gist of part one, at least, of chapter five.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a great summary. I think this story is so canonical in progress studies. It should be just unit one, chapter one, right? Like this story, which is chronicled
Mm,
very well in The Alchemy of Air. If you haven't read the book, it's really fascinating. The full story of Haber-Bosch process is
yeah.
just incredible. One of the most
Mm,
important industrial
mm,
processes ever developed. It's the reason if you are listening to this podcast, that a third of you are still alive and not starving. It's a reason that we're able to support the billions of people that came online in the past 50 years. Essentially, all it is drawing out nitrogen from the air, right? The air that we breathe is mostly nitrogen. And to be able to invent a process that takes it out and makes it usable for nitrogen fertilizers so that we can grow crops everywhere. It seems like a simple thing, but at the time, so, when they set the stage for William Crookes' speech in, what is it, like 1898 or something, right at the turn of the century, it was not immediately obvious how we were going to feed the rest of the world. It was
yeah.
concerning. I think so smart people knew this was coming, right? Like he picks on Paul Ehrlich, but there was a couple of other folks who had raised the alarm bells about this, basically saying, look, you have this impending disaster coming. The world is running out of food by, what was it? I think by Crookes's estimates, it was by 1931, we would have a shortage. There would be not enough grains to feed the world, and you'd have mass famine, right? And had everything stayed the
Mhm.
same, and had we not called on chemists to develop this, and had people not had the foresight to realize this impending challenge, that may very well have happened. But I think what's interesting about this story is that, and Crawford sums this up very nicely, it's like the dichotomy of pessimism versus optimism is a false one, right? I think
Mm,
this sort of harkens back to the adage from Patrick Collison where he's pessimists sound smart, but optimists make money. And I kind of love that because this is the perfect example of that, right? I think few people appreciate the importance of the synthesis of ammonia from air, the Haber-Bosch process. It's hard to overstate just how important this technology was. It's the reason most of us are alive today. It's the reason that our planet can support 8 billion human beings. One of the most important industrial processes ever developed. And what's fascinating is who solved this. It wasn't just capitalism or science. It was this institutional mix, right? You have BASF, which is a for-profit company. You have Carl Bosch, who's this business guy that saw a commercial opportunity and invested in the scaling. And then you have Fritz Haber, who's this eccentric chemist who wanted recognition, not money. He's trying to prove his patriotism. He saved billions through fertilizer. So the point is that capitalism is just one ingredient that bakes the cake. You need diverse institutions, motivations, actors working together, sometimes markets, sometimes states, sometimes eccentric individuals with ego problems. Usually it's this messy combination. It's really a remarkable story, and I think it's probably one of the most important lessons in this whole study of human progress. I think what's interesting as well, when you consider Paul Ehrlich as a character, Paul Ehrlich was the famous one who bet economist Julian Simon in the Simon Ehrlich wager, which he famously lost, right? And Ehrlich published the population bomb in the 60s,
mm,
which argued that mankind was facing this demographic catastrophe with the rate of population growth quickly outstripping the supply of food resources, right? So it's the same Malthusian argument, right? And so Ehrlich and his colleagues picked five metals they thought would undergo big price increases. So chromium, copper, nickel, tin, and tungsten. And then on paper, they bought $200 worth of each for a total bet of $1,000. So using the prices on September 29th, 1980 as an index, right? And then the payoff date was supposed to be 10 years later. So September 29th, 1990. And if the inflation adjusted prices of these various metals rose in the interim, Simon would pay Ehrlich the combined difference, right? Because Julian Simon, who famously wrote the book The Ultimate Resource, arguing that the ultimate resource is actually human ingenuity, not any one of these precious metals. So if the prices fell, then Ehrlich and all of his friends would pay Julian Simon. Now, not to spoil the surprise for you, but yeah, Ehrlich lost in pretty spectacular fashion. Right? Ehrlich
Mm.
had mailed Julian Simon a check for $600, which would be the equivalent of $1,400 today, to settle the wager. Right. So all of these metals went down in nominal terms, and all of the metals, sorry, I think three out of the five metals went down in nominal terms, and all five of them fell in price in inflation adjusted terms. Why did this happen? It's because these metals are not scarce in themselves. It's like the scarcity is a function of human ingenuity. And as soon as we come out with better ways to extract and synthesize these metals, then they would go down in price, which they always do. Things always go down in price because human ingenuity triumphs over all other challenges over a long enough time period, which Julian Simon was smart enough to realize. And Ehrlich just, this guy just wouldn't take the L. I mean, also throughout this entire story, like this guy just did
Yeah.
not admit that he was
Yeah.
wrong.
It's crazy. I really thank you for introducing that book, The Alchemy of AI. I want to go back and read it because there's some crazy stats that Crawford mentioned about the Haber-Bosch process, which was what that is. What did he say? In 1925, was already creating 36% of the world's nitrogen fertilizer, and that share was is now like over 99%. And like more outstandingly, consuming 1% of the total world energy usage. That is crazy. Absolutely crazy. I didn't recognize its importance. And so, yeah, I'm definitely going over and reading that. And
Yeah,
also, Julian,
fertilizer is pretty boring, right? We see
yeah,
it happening if you drive in like rural parts of the US that are
oh,
really, you'll see people having tanks of nitrogen fertilizer and it's ammonia. It's not super interesting, right? But it's the reason we're all alive today.
yeah, I guess at its time it would have been like especially exciting, but now it's drifted into the background as something we take for granted, like many other things. Yeah, so yeah, definitely gonna put that on my reading list over the holidays, and also the Julian Simon book that you mentioned. That sounds like super fascinating too.
Oh yeah, fantastic book, The Ultimate Resource. I think it's also on the Andreessen reading list. So one of those canonical books that you just, yeah, at least flip through the first couple of chapters. But tying it back to, so I think just these points about the optimism and pessimism, a false
Mm,
dichotomy, right? Like
mm,
Crookes was pessimistic and he
mm,
was alarmist, but he was
mm,
optimistic about the solution, right? He
mm.
says, and this is a time in the Victorian era where people are optimistic about technological progress in general, which is great. But he says this is a call for all chemists to come forward and give it your best shot. And that's exactly what
Yeah.
happened. And it was really a slam dunk for Fritz Haber, for the chemists and the institutional framework to come through and make this happen. So it's
Mm,
as Crawford puts it, pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. This is solutionism, fully acknowledge problems, vigorously pursue solutions. Both blind optimism and blind pessimism encourage passivity, right? Blind optimism is we'll figure it out, no worries, everything's all good. That's bad, right? But if you say this kind of fatalistic attitude, oh, there's nothing we can do about it, this is just we're doomed to failure, there's going to be mass famine, that's also not an approach, right? And so I think when you map that onto today and what's happening, it's a similar issue with global warming, right? And Bill Gates putting out this
yeah.
book of, okay, we're emitting, what is it, 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere every year, but there is solutions, right? There's direct air capture and there's green premiums and like once again through a combination of eccentric personalities and big egos and state will and capitalism, this big bundle of forces working in more or less the same direction, I do think we'll get there. And I think the writing's already on the wall for that. We already have developed nations who are getting most of their energy from renewables. Norway, it's just, yeah, it's just something that I think everything tilts alarmist, right? Everything tilts pessimistic, right? Like your friend group chats and social media, and there's literally a subreddit called R Collapse. Doom prophecies get clicks. Nobody wants to hear things get better. But the
Mm,
alarmists are almost always wrong about the timeline and the magnitude, but we keep listening because the psychology is so strong. If it doesn't, they say in journalism, if it bleeds, it leads, and this is no
mm,
different.
yeah. And we're seeing the same thing with in the sphere of AI as well. Okay, it's not an it's not an existential crisis that has been like forced upon us by the environment. We're manufacturing it. It's technology that we're creating, which is maybe puts it makes it a slightly different problem than overpopulation and famine and the environmental crisis. But nonetheless, we're seeing the same archetypes evolving from those who are pushing for progress, those who are like nonchalant about it, think like things will resolve themselves, from those who are also like alarmist and want us to obey and stop and hinder any kind of evolution of this technology, to the realists. And it seems to play out like whenever it comes to something of the scale that can impact humanity globally. And so, I think it's wonderful that Crawford introduces these archetypes that we can then use to see the world that we live in today and identify those characters, know how to respond to them. And I think we have to be thankful to both like early as well as crooks, like in the sense that from the point of view that despite their approach to the solution being wildly different and most of us wanting to side with crooks who's pro-humanity, pro-growth, thankful that both of them are made effort to introduce a problem and to make us aware of it as a kind of a species. And I think we do need more people who are like raising the flags and saying, hey, this is a problem here that we think is of great importance. Let's go and then we need those people to also say, all right, let's go and solve this problem in a positive way. And yeah, I hope like maybe this channel at some point or some other channels become like antennas that broadcast. Here are some of the problems that we should be really focusing our attention on
Yeah.
and solve.
No, I think some people should sound the alarm bells for sure. It's a win-win, right? Because if you sound
Yeah.
the alarm bells, not only do you make humanity aware of the issue, but also you're going to get your clicks and your likes and your engagement, and it's rage bait and it's shareable and it's good for the algorithms. They love it. But at the end of the day, you hopefully bring into that funnel a few smart people who have the will and the fortitude and the optimism to say, hang on a second, we can actually solve this. But of course, there's always the people who will, there's the meme of, oh, here's a solution. And then they tear up the paper and they're like, I don't want a solution. I want to be mad
Mhm.
about AI. But they're always going to be those people. That's fine. Like I said, like Patrick Collison says, you sound smart if you're pessimistic. It sounds like, oh, I'm not naive. I don't fall for the naive optimist scenario. You sound clever if you're pessimistic, but at the end of the day, if you want to make money or make a change in the world or make your dent in the universe, you have to be optimistic, right? You have to believe that, yes, this is a challenge and it will be hard, but is a grappleable problem and we can actually do something about it.
Absolutely. We should talk a little bit about Nicholas Borlaug as well and like what he represented. He's a scientist and he spent a lot of his effort and time on trying to deal with the problem of overpopulation. I think specifically he tackled the problem from genetic engineering, trying to modify wheat so it became more resilient to some of the problems that it was facing at the time. He put a lot of effort into that himself and his team too. And over time they had like huge success in developing and engineering wheat that not only became more bountiful because of its resistance to some of the diseases at the time, but then had more favorable properties that enabled it to flourish in sort of other ways too. And so we saw like a huge bounty in sort of wheat and crop harvest that staved off some of the issues that Ehrlich was talking about at the time. But I think what I want to draw people's attention to, like when it comes to Borlaug, was he was also very much a realist and knew that the world moved on and knew that the world was dynamic and is an ecosystem that's continually evolving. And so despite a solution that crops up at a time to solve a particular problem, there will always be like new problems that will emerge, either as a consequence of the solutions or because just the world generally evolves. And for us to not be complacent. I think that's important as well as an attribute that we should all have to stave off complacency, recognize that utopia is something that we constantly must be building towards. And the moment we stop pushing the boulder up the hill, it's going to roll back and squash us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
You create new solutions bring new problems, right? So
yeah,
you never have a full solution. You have a solution, but then three new problems crop up, and then you need
yeah,
solutions for those, right? So it's always going to be this game of whack-a-mole with
yeah,
progress. There's always going to be a bundle that you then need to address
yeah,
some of the negative impacts, and then you always have to like on top of the previous solutions, build things that mitigate the problems and challenges that come with the new solutions. And that's
yeah.
just how progress moves forward, unfortunately. It's never a linear path.
Yeah. David Sendra from the Founders Podcast actually interviewed James Dyson earlier in the week, and he said exactly this too, that new solutions don't necessarily address all of the problems they address some problems of the older generational technology, but oftentimes there might also be dimensions in which they introduce new problems, or they're not as effective as the past solutions. That's just the nature of innovation, that we don't patch up over everything. There's a constant flux of problems and solutions, and I think this probably the beginning of infinity by David Deutsch is probably one of the seminal books which kind of talks about this, why we'll probably never solve all the problems in the universe because like problems will continue to emerge over time, and just to expect that or
I've heard David Deutsch is the smartest living human, so I need to do more research on this guy.
I'm about halfway through, but it's not an easy read, put it that way. But I think the gist of it is that we'll never run out of problems, so don't lose faith.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. That's fascinating. But so I think that being said, when we consider this character of Borlaug, who I think
Mm.
is, do I have it right that literally all this dude is doing is breeding new varieties of wheat? That's all it is, right? Like
Okay.
there's no AI, there's no fancy machine, there's no fancy chemical process. He's literally just breeding different breeds of wheat to get
Mm.
something that doesn't suffer from this disease, which they called like rusting, stem
Mm.
rust.
Mm. I don't know the science behind it, and perhaps particular essay doesn't do justice to the effort and the intellect that might be needed to do that. But it does sound like that, some kind of exactly gene crop selection over many years.
It's interesting because I think people tend to underestimate, like agricultural sciences is not the hottest topic in the world. It's not something you hear tons about every day in the news. It's not like these other sexy areas of technology. Even Palmer Luckey with his dev tech company, Anduril, is getting a hell of a lot more press and excitement than your most exciting ag tech startup. But the
Mm.
ag tech space is really interesting because, as Borlaug shows, if you can just crossbreed with shorter varieties, which increase grain yield and turn that energy into grain and less into straw, like this is like such a simple thing, but it won him the Nobel Peace Prize, wasn't it? In 1970, he got the Nobel Peace Prize for
Yeah.
this, estimated to have saved
Mm.
hundreds of millions from famine. I think another thing that's interesting is just this guy wasn't a capitalist at all. I mean, he was not motivated by money or riches. He was a humanitarian guy, and he worked for the philanthropic Rockefeller Foundation, and he did tedious manual work for years, distributed seeds freely, and his goal was saving lives, not monetizing the IP.
It comes to mind like I was using Gemini a while back and asking for various archetypes of people, and especially scientists and creators and inventors. And it's so interesting that it brought up Nicholas Paul. I didn't know who he was at the time. I do wonder, it sounds like he did hugely important work and he's probably like all over the internet, which is maybe why these AI models bias towards bringing him up. But yeah, I guess it goes to show that sometimes the solution doesn't necessarily require ingenuity and more so persistence and effort. And that's okay too, as long as we're solving problems.
Yeah, it's crazy how important mindset is in all of this, right? If you think you can do it, you probably can. And if you think you can't, then you probably can't. And intelligence only gets you so far, but it's only one ingredient that bakes the cake here. You need to have the mindset and the ingenuity or persistence.
Yeah. So I guess if we distill this, the main points that he's trying to raise in this first part, it was really like take action, be a solutionist, right? Accept that there are problems and let's tackle problems, but let's do it in a way that moves humanity forward rather than postpones progress or forces us to regress. And the second thing I think, which stems out of a branch out of Borlaug's story, is this idea of avoid complacency. Let's not get too comfortable with where we are, because inevitably things are going to continue to crop up and hurt us as a species. So let's keep going to build towards infinitely that infinite horizon. Yeah, I think those are the two things that really start for me anyway,
Yeah.
when I
No,
thought
I
about
think that's
trying to
right.
communicate.
Yeah, I think when you consider the positions of Ehrlich and just how ugly this was, that he basically said the battle to feed humanity is now over. Millions of people will
Mm,
starve to death in spite of any of the new programs that we embark on now. So he's basically
yeah.
adopting a very
Right.
fatalist stance of don't even try. And then his
Mm,
prescription is the consequences of this were horrifying. His prescription is saying there's some countries which just can't be saved. We just can't do it. Maybe not as dramatic, but it does remind me of the degrowth mindset we now see in Europe. When you realize how many people today die of overheating and heat exhaustion out of lack of access to air conditioning in Europe because of these really strong environmental initiatives and rationing of electricity prices. And there's these anecdotes. It's horrible in Italy where in the middle of August when it's 40 degrees, people are putting in air conditioning units and then neighbors are tattling on each other because you're not supposed to have air conditioning units. And when, gun violence is a real problem in the US, sure, but more people die. You're more likely to die of overheating in Europe due to lack of AC than you are to die of some kind of gun death in the United States. And so I think it directly maps onto what you saw as this fatalist attitude towards issues with overpopulation and starvation back then and what people interpreted as those challenges and how we would confront those. There's the fatalistic approach of there's just nothing we can do versus the solutionist approach. And I think you see the same thing now with new challenges like climate change.
Yeah, yeah. I think when I also just reflect on as an individual and what his story like warns us about, two things. One is that people in a position of power and privilege can sometimes be quite selfish, and we should be wary of that. That many of the problems that sometimes are caused by us and our first mover advantage into pushing into ever progress and future state, and we we have a right to bring other people around the world along with us, not to condemn them and suppress them so we can continue to enjoy our privileges while they stay put and suffer. So that's one thing. And the second thing is also just like how much consistency bias shapes the world and shapes people's thinking, by which I mean he obviously put a position forward which was quite fatalistic, as you said, and refused to change his opinion despite like the overwhelming evidence. And how much of that happens in governments, academia, businesses, where people are unwilling to change their minds and change like their investments and their go back to incentives and to fund new solutions because it doesn't align with the narrative that they've been leading, and how much that hinders progress. Like how many people did early throw off from investing in positive solutions because of like his status as a thinker. I think a book that kind of maybe illuminates this a little bit more is the book like Where's My Flying Car, where it talks about there how we could be further along in many like dimensions of technology if only you know certain obstacles are removed, one being like people stopped poo-pooing like potential solutions because of who they were. Yeah, so anyway, those are two things that I draw from like his character.
Yeah. No, the human ego can be an incredible force for good, and it can also be an incredible force for
Yeah,
regressive policy
for
making
sure.
and just
Yeah,
stubbornness and lack of ability to
yeah,
admit when you're obviously not right. But
yeah,
anyways, exactly. And always forever onwards, right? As we
yeah.
think about part two of chapter five, right, Crawford talks about how progress creates problems, and that's okay. And so it gets back at what we were talking about before. I don't know if you want to give the quick overview here, and then we can dive into the three kind of specific examples that he gives about underwriters' laboratories and FDA talks and catalytic converters.
Yeah, I won't go into the details, but I think what he's trying to emphasize here in part two is there's often this like narrative, this conflict that is set up between like progress and safety. And on one hand, you have people that are like pushing really hard accelerationists, and on the other hand, you always have people like lawyers or regulation which have to abate and suspend progress, and there's always this fight and tension between them. And I think he's actually saying that no, this hasn't always been the case, isn't the case. That's maybe a narrative that is pushed forward by the media. And there's plenty of examples in which scientists and researchers are actually like, as well as thinking about progress, also thinking about their position of responsibility and how do we move things along safely. And we must do that anyway, because he's ultimately, like Crawford's ultimately a humanist, and he cares not just about like technology for technology's sake, but technology that serves humanity, and in which case it needs to be not just solving some of the problems, but doing so in a way that is long lasting and safe and useful for generations to come. And I think that this whole chapter is, the second part is really just shining the light on how important it is that we, yeah, uphold that responsibility as humans. He offers like very favorable examples of like where safety is actually, and people that are working on regulation and safety have really helped us bring forward the technology into the real world in a way that's useful, and we draw more value from that.
Yeah.
So that was my, yeah, what I drew from this part.
I think especially now it's in the Silicon Valley world, we have this attitude of move fast and break things. And there's the
Yeah.
meme of the weak aura says, I need to do thorough research and consult with
Mm,
experts and carefully calculate everything. And the strong aura is just,
yeah.
let's just launch and see what happens. Move fast and break things. And I remember sharing that in a group chat with my engineering buddies. And one of my buddies who's an EE major was like, yeah, please do not work on anything nuclear related if that's your attitude. Safety is
Right.
of utmost
Right.
importance there. It's we should take different approaches
Right.
for building enterprise software than we do for building, say, software on like your MCAS system for a Boeing 737, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Something that comes to mind here is Jeff Bezos' framework on decision making on reversible and irreversible decisions, and applies in this context too. Nuclear weapons are, in many cases, or nuclear technology is irreversible, a serious like technology, and echo exactly what your friend said, and like resonates so strongly. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But I think the
Mm,
chapter is important because it's basically saying it. So the key message here, which is a really interesting pill to swallow, is look, we appreciate what technology gives us. We appreciate progress. We
mm,
are champions of progress. And every time I see progress, I will cheer it on. But not all
mm,
progress is technological in nature, right? Road safety improved
mm,
through seatbelts and driver's educations and licensing and drunk driving campaigns. That's not a technological breakthrough necessarily. Maybe technology is a piece, but like Crawford is
mm,
arguing that the technical work of health and safety has gone mostly unsung, right? It creates this misleading narrative where technologies creates problems and then activism or the law solves them. The philosophical point is
yeah.
all triumphs are temporary, all solutions create new problems, just as in science all answers raise new questions, right? And so the fact that tech creates new problems doesn't negate the advance, right? I have a lot of misgivings about what AI is doing to child development, right? TikTok brain,
Mm,
attention spans, parasocial relationships. But I'm also optimistic that we as a society will learn to adapt to these challenges. And those adaptations
mm,
will not necessarily be technological in nature. We will mature around the technology. We will develop norms and guardrails against that, just like we did with television, which everyone said it would rot brains. And we developed educational programming, which is great. Just like video games, we worried about violence and we developed ratings and moderation and just like social media. And we're still figuring that out and that discourse still exists. But the pattern is always new technology, it creates problems, the culture adapts, and there's a new equilibrium. So it's a whack-a-mole game for sure.
yeah. Yeah. I think he doesn't really mention it here, but I think there's also one thing that we have to be careful of is an overcautious attitude and getting the balance right between progress and discussions around safety. I think a couple of years back, when the conversations around AI and ChatGPT first came out, there was, yeah, as you said earlier, the pendulum swung towards, in the beginning, euphoria, excitement, but quickly people were really like feeling a sense of dread, not understanding. We had little understanding like how it could impact society. And so there was huge resistance against progress there. And it was in some ways great. They were raising the alarm bells, and more money went into safety research, and it's probably wise. Like we should be doing a lot of that stuff. But I think at times it was going a bit too far, like pausing progress entirely. And maybe the EU embodies this attitude a bit too strongly around being a bit too cautious, tiptoeing around progress. And I feel it sometimes when a lot of new technology is introduced to the US when it comes to AI, and we don't get any of that here. So really, I think that there's a danger to swinging too far in the opposite direction. And so trying to get that balance right is hard, but I think we need to keep striving for that.
Yep. Yep. No, absolutely. And just to run through these anecdotes that he brought up, right? So case study one, Underwriters Laboratory or UL, and I didn't know about this, but apparently
Sure.
fire was how we kept lights in our homes
Mm,
before we had artificial light and light bulbs. And we thought, okay, now with electricity, everything's supposed to be safer than with open flames. But paradoxically, early electricity increased the fire risk. You had
Mm,
faulty products, you had exposed wiring,
mm,
shorts, unsafe heating elements. So this insurance
mm,
executive was like, hey, we're going to create this organization called Underwriters Laboratories, or UL, which tested devices for strength and durability and insulation and overheating risks. And they tested for abuse by careless people or mischievous kids or whatever. And they were this
mm,
check against cheap manufacturers, right? One 10 cents electric toaster had exposed heating elements. Placed on a pine board, the flames developed within minutes. So there was just no checks on this stuff. They didn't trust the
mm.
manufacturers. They tested goods from the open market. And by 1923, they had tested 35,000 plus appliances, labeling 500 million items every year. Today, the electronics are so safe that arson causes more fires than electricity, right? And so the UL name is virtually unknown. It's a tiny insignia on every electrical device. Now we have these organizations that are able to check every appliance, and they deserve a place in progress history as well.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to run through some of the other ones as
Yeah,
well?
sure. So,
Or
case study two is the FDA, right? So, medicine before 1900 did more harm than good. Snake oil, bloodletting, mercury treatments, poisonous patented
mm,
medicines. The drugs they developed, effective drugs were developed at this time, but they were primitive. You had the Poison Squad in
mm,
1902, where 12 volunteers were fed high levels of chemical preservatives, recorded symptoms, and could only produce rough dose ranges. So, in 1938, the law required safety and testing before selling drugs. The law did not equal knowledge of how to test, right? FDA researchers spent the better part of 2 decades and all through the 50s trying to work this out. They published the FDA Bible, which we still rely on today, right? Which is LD50, the dosing affecting 50% of animals, which is most reproducible, the testing of at least 3 species, translate animal results to humans based on species similarity, control administrative routes, physical state, solvents. So this basically lays the groundwork for modern day preclinical trials. And if you know anything about when you go out of preclinical, which is animal studies, and into the clinic, the first thing you look at are what are called first in human trials, right? And these are toxicology trials where you have a group of healthy volunteers and you give them a small dose of the drug and you slowly bring up that dose, carefully monitoring all of their metrics and biomarkers and vitals and things like that, right? The nature is devious and subtle, and to reveal her secrets, the key must fit precisely in the lock, right? So the methodology that Crawford celebrates, the LD50, the dose response curves, are genuinely good science from the 1940s and 50s. The FDA today is a different story, right? Drugs, we're a little bit behind. China is running circles around the US on clinical trials. We have 10-year plus approval timelines. There's this rigorous process that became a bureaucratic moat, and we traded off maybe too much velocity for marginal safety. On food, the FDA is just an absolute disaster, right? Food companies are poisoning Americans with ingredients that are banned in Europe. Microplastics, endocrine disruptors are just ignored. Same agency, totally different competence. We need another UL,
mm.
probably, like a private organization that labels foods and helps consumers decide because the government's just failing us. We're starting to see people do this, by the way. There's a few apps on the internet now that are tracking microplastic intensities and other heavy metals in food. But this institutional competence is very domain specific and very time variant. The FDA was excellent at methodology in the 40s and 50s, and thank God for that. And they were decent at drug safety even today, probably the gold standard, but not good at velocity and not good at food.
As you're kind of sharing these examples, one of the things that I'm thinking quite a bit about is the trade-off that he calls around like velocity of progress and that trade-off against like safety. And towards the end of this chapter, he talks about how in today, like we do a much better job of testing and introducing technology in a safer way, in a safer way. I'm wondering, like, through these examples, like, what do we learn? Like, why do we think that is? Do they teach us like why that is, or why we matured such a way? And yeah, and again, I'm thinking back to this idea of being too cautious. Are we? Where is the trade-off now? Where is the trade-off now? It seems to me like when I read through like case study one and case study two, we introduced electricity, we got it out there, and this UL company was like instrumental in helping us extract like all the utility from it in a safe way that didn't damage like society. But it feels to me today like we would that company would exist before like electricity was either introduced to the world, and we'd be like simulating and doing all this kind of tests like before we even got it out there. And the only reason we could this company existed, could learn like what was the issue, is because someone decided, all right, we're going to put electricity, people are going to start benefiting from it, but it's going to give us like real world examples of what is going on, real world evidence.
For sure.
And I do want, yeah, now it feels different. I'm not sure why, just a feeling, but yeah, I don't know like what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And that's why we have the case that we have in California where they're proposing legislation that would be, oh, you can't do computations, you can't perform computations beyond 10 to the 26 flops. They're
Mm,
literally trying to legislate math because
mm,
apparently linear regression is dangerous now with like AI. And to be clear, I'm not saying that AI safety shouldn't be a concern. We should develop AI
mm,
in a safe way. But it
mm,
does feel like, especially in the European Union and other jurisdictions in the West, we're so rich, we're so comfortable, we're so resting on our laurels of all everything that technology's provided, and this gets back to some of the earlier chapters in the manifesto, that we just inherit this prosperity
mm,
and we
mm.
forget that in order to make progress, we actually do have to take a bit of risk, and
Yeah,
we should be, yes, keeping safety in mind, but it shouldn't be like it shouldn't be we should be putting the cart before the horse in terms
sure.
of mandating safety protocols before we even know what the technology is capable of providing us.
Exactly, exactly. And it's obviously highly nuanced, right? When you're creating a technology that has the potential of an existential threat, like you want to be taking a lot more caution there than something else. It's totally understandable. But yeah, as you said, like generally feels like sometimes our tolerance of risk has diminished for whatever reason. Yeah, that's been the case.
We're too rich. We're also older than we ever have been as a society. Like median ages, I think that can't be just diminished as a trivial factoid. Like that is a probably key reason why, if you looked at back in the 1960s when our median age was what in the 20s and 30s, and now our median age here in the U.S. is what like 46. It's just too
Mm,
many old people, and we have gerontocratic societies as well. Who you look at our leaders, look at our lawmakers. These people are old and
mm,
they are directing policy that's related to the
yeah.
safety protocols. And I don't think these
Mm,
people understand AI at all. Nobody does.
mm,
And
mm,
they're dictating how we should be developing AI. It's like, wait a minute.
yeah.
You're not going to be around for the future that you're trying to dictate policy for. So it does seem a
Mm.
bit odd for sure. But no, it's true. Do you want to wrap us up here? I think the four key points are interesting in terms of the closing arguments for this chapter.
Thinking over part two, Crawford wraps up with four key points. Like they are health and safety are progress. So even when problems were caused by progress, all triumphs are temporary. All solutions create new problems. And I guess the question is the new problem better? And can it be solved? The second key point is that there is a trade-off between velocity and safety. Velocity alone doesn't really equal progress. So in many cases, we want new things, we want new technologies, we want new drugs, but we also want them to be safe. And again, as we said before, this is nuanced dependent on the technology that we're working on. But for the most part, we want to introduce technology that is helping humanity and not harming us. The third point he's making is that we're more proactive about safety over time. He gives examples of self-driving cars that get extensive testing now before deployment, unlike earlier cars. Genetic engineering researchers also are proactively like held. Genetic engineering research is being proactively held at what is a Asilomar conference to work out safety protocols. And the last key point is his message to researchers, specifically calling out that these are the smartest people. You are the smartest people. You're working on this technology in the in and outs of it. You see the opportunities and you see the problems probably earlier than most of us. And safety is one of your many sacred responsibilities. So that this kind of feeling should activate your feeling of solutionism. You ruthlessly identify problems, solve them, seek solutions, but also keep safety in mind.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think that's great. It's funny. It's you look at 2025 from 100 years ago, from 1925. Imagine being in 1925 and knowing what 2025 is going to look like and saying, "Oh, I want to go live in 2025." And then someone telling you, "Oh, in 2025 they might look rich, but they have their problems too." And my
Mm,
rebuttal would always be, yeah, but I'd much rather have 2025's problems than have 1925's problems. And it's the
for sure.
same issue, right? You look at a poor country looking at a rich country. Look at Switzerland, look at Norway. Pick your favorite rich country and say,
Yeah.
okay, look at Norway. They have problems too. Yeah, sure. But I'd rather have Norway's problems than have problems associated with a developing country. I think most people in the world envy having Norway's problems. I think most countries would be delighted to have Norway's problems.
And just tie into this, I was watching a video of Buffett earlier today, And he really captured this point quite well. He was saying the quality of life of most people in the United States, even the poorest, like a couple of percent, in certain dimensions, was much better than John D. Rockefeller was, who was the richest person at the time in the early 1900s. Goes to show like how far we've come, that most people can afford that level of life or have the privilege of living life. Yeah,
Oh,
in
for
such a way.
sure. For sure. I think that's one thing that's incredibly interesting is if you were to ask many people, would you trade places with Queen Victoria, right? Would you trade places with
Yeah.
someone who was wealthy and noble and powerful in the Victorian era? And I think many people would
Mm,
say, "Oh yeah, of course. Sure you would. You live in
mm,
incredible luxury. You have this huge palace. You have all these incredible fineries from all over the world." And it's, hang on a second. Queen Victoria herself had no antibiotics, no anesthesia, no electricity, no
mm,
refrigeration, high
mm,
infant mortality, even for
mm,
royals. Died from intestinal issues that today we would cure with Pepto-Bismol. If you
mm,
live in a trailer park in Missouri, you have air conditioning, you have a smartphone with all of human knowledge baked into it. You have Netflix and modern medicine and frozen food and indoor plumbing. Yeah, it's interesting to me just how, at what point did the life of royals in Europe reach parity with the life of a working class person today in the West? And that answer is probably like 100 years ago. Like,
mm,
the people of today who are working class in the West have a better life materially, comfortably, in all respects than
mm.
royals did 100 years ago, which is remarkable. And it shows that what's that economic principle that what the rich and famous of today have, the common man will have tomorrow. And it's just, we have this incredible cost curve that happens over time.
Mm. Those are beautiful anecdotes that just capture this perfectly. And I guess let's not be complacent because there's still a long way to go. There's still a long way, long way to go.
For sure. For sure. I think it's a great place to leave it. Did want to quickly
Yeah.
run through this week's segment of why doesn't this exist yet? Each person can
Mm.
bring one or two items. Go ahead and explain. I encourage anyone to comment anything that you've heard or seen where maybe these things do exist yet. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, two things. Two things. One is related to me being a new parent and some of the challenges that I'm experiencing there. The other one, which I'll start with, is an idea that I drew from this book I just finished reading called Being Digital. It was written by one of the first directors of the MIT Media Lab, Nicholas Negroponte. And he kind of shared this idea of how like a lot of intelligence is often on like server side and not on client side. And yeah, he gave like a particular example, which I thought I'd be curious to see how it goes. And people do talk a lot about this, like hyper-personalized media, where information from the server is shared with everyone and it's exactly the same. And we'll take like the example of a weather report. So you share like the core information that comes from like the meteorological like lab or facility or whatever. It's just, presentation of the data. But then your television has intelligence and knowledge of who you are and how you like to consume that information. And so would, and I said television is whatever future device it is and whatever it's called at the time, will be like translating that information in a way that, is most appealing to you, whether it's like a video that looks different from someone else's video, the type of presenter, maybe it's just audio only, maybe it's just illustrations and maps and stuff like that. Device which really like we have the intelligence on the client side that is adjusting information to our like hyper personalized like demands and needs. So I'd be very curious, especially if you want to narrow like the context of it down, like a television program, let's say, or maybe it's just the news. What would the news look like if we all consumed it in our own like preferred format? Yeah. Is that a recipe for the disaster or kind of an exciting new universe of like media consumption? I don't
I mean,
know.
I guess it's like if you're a trader and you customize your Bloomberg terminal to have like certain
I guess,
screens up, you're like, okay, if I'm a trader who works in the macro area, I want to have the jobs number up in this chart, and I want to have this chart being the 10-year, and I want to have this chart being the Fed funds rate or whatever it is, right? So you're gonna configure your workspace differently than if you're like a commodities trader where you're like, oh yeah, show me the price for this rare earths or show me the price for nickel or copper in real time. So you're
yeah,
going to customize the news flashes you get from different companies.
yeah,
So I guess we
yeah.
already have that in certain respects,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yeah. And I think maybe the point that he was emphasizing was also one, the broadening of context that allows this intelligent system to personalize the media for us. I think that was maybe the standout point. But the second thing that I'm thinking about is this kind of thing gets talked a lot about in television shows. Like you might hear it now where you'll have a different story for each individual based on like kind of their desires, their needs, and how that might actually like fracture society because people are like consuming different things. There isn't like a shared like narrative that we can discuss and the dangers of that. Curious, in some contexts, it seems like it could be very exciting, like it worked well, like in the news example that you just shared in Bloomberg, but in other ones, maybe it's not something that we might want. But yeah, I want to see that happen on a greater base, on a larger scale.
It's
Um,
interesting. If it happens with cultural things like with TV shows, right? Like the fact that The Sopranos, that everyone would watch the same episode and then come into the office on Monday and chat about what
yeah.
happened, or the fact that you and I watch the cricket game and then we go go in the office and we talk about what the score was. But if all those things are now happening differently, if a different team won for you than for me, or if there's a different set of plot points and character development that happens for you and for me, I don't know how much fun it is. We can't chat about what's going to
No,
happen
you're right.
next because it's different for either of us.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I agree with you there. I'm not sure how enjoyable fracturing like cultural media would be, and it also like at that point you deprive yourself of like the artistic choices that were made by the director and the actor, and you lose all that beauty and craft that they put into sculpting that thing. So I'm not sure how much you want AI to be sculpting all sorts of cultural media that we receive. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be it's sort of a utopian future for sure.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Okay. So that's your this why doesn't this exist yet? Is personalized media on the server side or on the client side.
Hyper contextualized, personalized media. Maybe let's narrow it down to a domain which would cause like fewer catastrophes, maybe information, I don't know, blogs or news or something along those lines. The second thing was it's related to infants and children, and it's to do with colic, a disease called disease or a collection of symptoms that give rise to the this ailment that everyone's calling colic. And I guess the surprise here and what I'd like to see is just a lot more clarity around like what this pathology is and like what is the cause of it. And it's something that's quite commonplace. I think it affects like 20 to 30% supposedly of infants. And we have in many we have what seems to be like very little information about what causes it and what it might be. I think if you go on the NHS website, they describe colic as when a baby cries a lot, but there's no obvious cause, which is
Which is basically just an
completely
umbrella term. Like we have no fucking idea. It's just when your baby screams uncontrollably and we haven't it doesn't ting the box for all the other things that we checked.
it's just like another bucket. It's like
Yeah.
it's something else. It's crazy. But I did start reading into some research papers, and they did suggest that it was related to like gastronomical issues or digestive issues. But there isn't really like a clear indication of why a baby develops this. So it's just like really shocking that 20-30% of babies are affected by this, but we still have zero understanding of what is actually the root cause. And I'm sure parents would pay some amount of money to stop their child screaming in their face like for 3 hours, which is like generally the window of time in which they're in pain, supposedly. So yeah, and I would pay for that now. So yeah,
There's a good
love
product
to see
market
that.
fit there for anyone who has a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. You know
I
how
think
much
what's
funding?
shocking is the world. Yeah, you put your thumb on the pulse of something super interesting, which is that I think the world of so within medicine, there's very little we understand about the human body and human physiology. We've just now begun to scratch the surface on a lot of different systems like genetics and genomics and mapping the
Mm,
human genome and what have you. But what's also interesting is within that, infants and babies, we know very little about. It's probably one of the more understudied areas of medicine is pediatric medicine, especially within babies and infants. There's just so much we don't know about that. They're always the last thing that we look at when we have new drugs to market. It's always you start with a drug of healthy adults and then you bring the age down to like children 10 and older and then it's like children 5 and older and then it's children 2 and over. But it's like the babies are always the last thing that we study because of all of these other reasons, parental concerns and ethical concerns and so forth. I think it was only recently that people didn't, wasn't it even recently that modern medicine thought that babies didn't feel pain, like newborn babies didn't feel pain or something like this?
really? Oh, that's
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre when you think that like babies weren't given anesthesia for certain procedures, like surgical procedures, when actually they did feel pain, but we just had no way of knowing that.
that's super surprising.
It's an interesting rabbit hole to go down because, like, how would you know? It's not like they can tell you.
Right,
They're always
exactly.
crying anyway.
There are some really like peculiar, mysterious cases surrounding babies. Like the other one, like beyond colic, and I'll shut up after this, is sudden infant death syndrome, which
Mm.
is talked about a lot, and it scares the bejesus out of so many parents. What the hell? Am I? Can I sleep? Because if I close my eyes, will I wake up and find my child is, I don't know, somehow passed away for some unknown reason? Sometimes it's, things to do with choking or on reflux and stuff like that. The way in which it's described is this just can just happen spontaneously. A child just stops living, and there's such a mystery around it. It's like, how in the 21st century can there be such mystery around like child development and child growth? And we've had billions of babies come into the world and had chance hopefully to observe like the development of children. Surely we'd have a better grasp on some of these, yeah, predicaments that stand in the way of like healthy child development.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if there was a sudden adult death syndrome, we'd have studied it to death by now. But for some reason with SIDS, I don't know much about it, but it does seem very understudied. And it does seem very not well mapped at all by our current understanding.
Yeah. Anyway,
It's
those are my
interesting.
calls, my requests. What did you have?
So here's mine. So a clinically accepted, reimbursed population scale early cancer detection screening system that actually works. And by works, I mean detects lethal cancers early,
Mm-hmm.
not indolent junk that would kill you anyway, has extremely low false positive rates at population base rates. And so this is super important. It sounds nerdy as hell, but like the reason this is important is because right now, Prenuvo and a lot of these full body MRI scans are coming for everyone. And a lot of doctors don't like this, and a lot of doctors have opinions about this, and we shouldn't scan everyone. And I get all that, but the cost curve is coming down so much that it's going to happen. You're going to have people getting MRI scans that are totally healthy and otherwise don't need them, and they're going to find stuff, lots of stuff, because then what? You're going to have, oh, we see a lump. What's the lump? I don't know. And so then what do? Then you do biopsies, and you do lots of biopsies, and then you do follow-up biopsies. But the problem with this, and if you go down the rabbit hole for biopsies, it's super interesting. Depending on the organ, these are insanely invasive. They cause horrible complications and sometimes they kill people, even today in 2025. Kidney biopsies have an 11% hematoma rate, and one out of every 1,600 people who get a kidney biopsy will die. And that doesn't seem like a very high number, 0.06%. But if everyone gets these, right? If every single person is going in for an MRI, and there's going to be all kinds of false positive rates because MRIs are not very good at seeing what the little lumps are, and we have lumps in our bodies that are unexplained all the time. And so you're going to get these false positives, and then you have to go for a biopsy, and it just creates more harm than good because if more people die from the biopsy than the actual cancer that it would have detected, then
Yeah.
you need this diagnostic pathway that doesn't require sticking needles into organs, right? We need liquid biopsies that are blood-based that actually work. All that we AI can tell indolent from lethal, but we need the full stack. And so until we have that, population scale screening might create more problems than it solves. And this gets on the theme we were talking about earlier today, right? Progress creates more problems. So it's interesting. I'm just surprised we don't have that yet. It's actually still in its infancy. Still, the best practice that we have is sticking a needle into your various organs where you might have a lump and you want to do a biopsy on. And
Yeah.
there's massive complications with those.
That's fascinating. Such an interesting idea. Like, what triggered this idea? What were you think about? Or what did you read? Or yeah.
I was looking at getting my Icon pass for this year because I was thinking about how many times I'm actually going to go skiing. And what I
Mm,
realized is with the premium Icon pass, they're now bundling like $250 off or $500 off, or I don't remember what it is, but they give you some kind of a discount towards your first Prenuvo scan. And
mhm,
Prenuvo has started to penetrate outside of tech circles and into kind of regular normies who are just interested in health and wellness and interested in preventative care. We're seeing it now with all the wearables companies, and you see all over New York City these ads for Function Health with Whoop. I wear a Whoop band. They're getting into the blood-based screenings and doing blood labs for healthy adults. And so this new wave of people who have disposable income who are willing to pay out of pocket for screening is just ever present. For those who notice it, it just seems inevitable that at some point the cost curve will come down and every healthy person who can afford it is going to go inside of an MRI machine. And Prenovo loves to tout the fact that, oh, look at how many early detections look how many deaths we prevented because people found a lump and it actually turned out to be something serious and we were able to prevent it and catch it in time. And that's great. And we hate hearing the opposite story of, oh, this person had a preventable illness, but they didn't know until they were stage 3 and then it was too late. And so we're like,
Yeah.
oh, the natural reaction is we need to do screenings, but
Mm,
actually the screenings lead to biopsies, and the
mm,
biopsies lead to complications, and those complications can sometimes be worse than
mm,
whatever cancer they would have found.
mm.
And so then the question becomes, what's the alternative to the biopsy? And it's going to be liquid biopsies or blood-based biopsies, which are based on genetic analysis and that type of thing. It's really cutting edge technology. But I guess my question is, why are we sitting here in 2025 still doing native kidney biopsies? Why do we not have something which has a very high specificity rate, which works at the population level? We just don't have that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Super fascinating. All right. That's really cool. Really cool stuff. Yeah. Definitely high tech. High tech. I love it. I love it.
Yep. Yep. So
Okay.
I'm gonna be spending more time doing deep dives on some of these companies that are developing super high specificity liquid biopsies and like doing more deep dives into like early blood-based cancer detection because I think this is an area that if it works is going to just be absolutely massive tailwinds
Mm,
because this is going to be the next logical step behind
mm.
broad-based screening protocols.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Awesome. All right. That brings us to the end of this episode. How should we wrap this up?
I would just give a quick recap of the main themes, right? Number one, solutionism is pessimism of intellect and optimism of will.
Yeah.
Pessimists sound smart, optimists make money. Institutional diversity is required for civilizational progress. Capitalism is not the only ingredient that bakes the cake. You need a few eccentric characters and a few profit-minded characters that come
Mm.
together and usually tackle these problems. Safety is progress. It's not an obstacle to progress. And we play whack-a-mole with progress, and that's okay.
Nicely put. Could not do it better myself.
No, that's great. I don't know if you want to do any plugs. Where can people find you?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on social media, I'm on Twitter, mostly on Twitter, to be honest. Yeah, otherwise, I also have a Substack where I write sometimes about AI. We will add that in the show notes. But those are the main places I'm hanging out these days.
Awesome. Awesome. Really great to talk to you as always, John. I'm super happy for you and the new family member and hope
Same
the
here.
family's doing well. We're going into the holiday season here, so the day we're recording this is the 14th of December. I hope we get another episode in early in the new year. So let's see. Let's see what we have the stamina for, what you as a father have the stamina for. But yeah, looking forward to the next one.
Lovely, man. Thank you. It's always good to see you.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Take care.